everybody. Welcome to another class with Web Yeshiva. I'm David Sedley. Tonight we're going to be speaking about Birkat Cohanim, the priestly blessing, which is part of the Amidah service and part of our series on the Amidah. And I guess an apology before we begin is that I've never given a shiur on Birkat Cohanim before, and I'm a Kohen, so I've been thinking about it for many decades, and so I couldn't limit it to one class. I've got to made it into a two-parter, and even so I feel like I'm missing so many things. So I may get too much in the weeds, and I apologize, but there's so much to say about Birkat Cohanim that I hope you'll find it interesting, and I'm always happy to have your feedback. So I want to start, what were some of the questions? The importance of Birkat Cohanim. This is from a cultural, historic point of view. The oldest text from the Hebrew Bible that we have discovered, that archaeologists have discovered, is Birkat Cohanim, found in the so-called Ketef Hinnom scrolls, which were found where the Menachem Begin Center is today. They date back to the 7th or 6th century BCE, First Temple period. This is the oldest evidence we have. I know the Torah goes back 1,000 years before that in round numbers. But in terms of archaeology, the earliest proof of a Torah we have is Birkat Cohanim. So that may be coincidental, or it may be that Birkat Cohanim was so significant that it was written down in a way that it was preserved, in a way that goes in. So Birkat Cohanim, we have evidence that you can see in the Israel Museum, and I'll talk more about the specifics of this next week. But it goes back to the oldest known writing we have, and Birkat Cohanim goes forward into the 23rd century, where even Vulcans are familiar with the concept of Birkat Cohanim. Leonard Nimoy and his Spock salute was the reason I was able to get Birkat Cohanim cufflinks, although they were sold as Star Trek cufflinks. So somehow this became culturally important, and not only for Jews, but for many people and science fiction fans as well. So let's talk about the importance of Birkat Cohanim. And it's so important that we turn our backs to God to say Birkat Cohanim. Right? Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, le'olam te'eh emat tzibor alecha. Rabbi Yitzchak said you should always have the fear of the congregation upon you. Sharei Kohanim peneihim kal pei ha'am, v'achareihem kal pei shechina. The Kohanim, when they say Birkat Kohanim, right, on the days that they say Birkat Kohanim, they're standing with their backs, they turn their backs on the Aron Kodesh, which is symbolically where the divine presence rests. They turn their back on the eastern wall, and they turn to face the congregation, because the Birkat Cohanim is for the congregation and the respect of the congregation, and so that shows it's rare that we turn our backs to God like that, but Birkat Cohanim is one of those cases. Shir Shirim Rabbah, we have a verse. The verse says, "Hine mitzato shel Shlomo shishim giborim saviv la." Solomon's bed has 60 warriors around it. Rabbi Bibi b'shem Rabbi Elazar b'Rabbi Yossi patak Rabbi Birkat Cohanim. So Rabbi Bibi explains this verse in the context of Birkat Cohanim. Hine mitato, when it says bed, what does that mean? Hine mitotav ushvatav. It means his tribes. Ha'ech ma'adat amar, similar to it says Shavuot Matot. Shel Shlomo, what does it mean for Shlomo? Shel melech shalom lo. It's the tribes of peace. Shlomo is the word of peace. Shishim giborim saviv la, elu shishim otiyot shebabirkat kohanim. The 60 warriors are the 60 letters of the priestly blessing. Migiborei Yisrael, shem magbirin et Yisrael. Of the valiant, the warriors of Israel, they strengthen Israel. Birkat Cohanim is kind of a life force that strengthens and defends and protects the Jewish people. So then the verse continues, All these warriors are holding swords. Amar Rabbi Azaria, Devarim Mevorachin B'Gvura. This is referred to things where the blessing comes from Gvura, from strength. Yivarech Hashem, Ya'er Hashem, Yisa Hashem. Right? The three blessings are coming from God, who is the Gibor. Melumedei Milchama, they're expert in war. Shem Nilchamim B'chol Minei Piraniot Sheish Ba'olam. That the words of the priestly blessing defend against all sorts of troubles in the world. Ish Chabo Ad Yericho Mipachad Baleilot. Every person has a sword on his thigh, afraid of the night. And here, this is both the Midrash and the Halacha. Shafilo Adam Ro'eh B'chalamo Cherev Mechatechet B'Yericho. If a person has a bad dream, a nightmare, even they see a sword cutting their leg, Ma Yaseh, what should they do? Yelech lebeit knesset v'yikra kriyat Shema v'yitpel tfilato. Go to shul, say Shema, pray. V'yishma Birkat Cohanim v'yaneh acharem Amen. Listen to Birkat Cohanim and answer afterwards Amen. Ve'en devar ra maziko, and nothing bad will happen to him. Lefikach matzir b'nei Aaron v'amer lehem. Therefore, there is a mitzvah for the children of Aaron, the Kohanim, to say, this is how you should bless the Jewish people. Now, maybe next week I'll have time to talk about dream amelioration during Birkat Cohanim, but even if we don't get into that, this Midrash says this kind of awesome power of Birkat Cohanim, which is different, I think, than any other prayer, and certainly than any other part of the Amidah, that this prayer, the Birkat Cohanim, the 60 letters of Birkat Cohanim have tremendous powers to uplift and protect the entire nation. So let's look at the text of the Amidah, because that is the topic of our shiur. And this is what is, well, there's two different versions of this, aren't there? There's the version when there are Kohanim doing Birkat Cohanim, which happens in most of Israel, in all communities, and outside of Israel in most Sephardi communities. And then there's the other version, which is recited when there are no Kohanim, or in places that don't do Birkat Cohanim daily, where it is then said by the Chazan, by the Shliach Tzibor. So this is the version that's said by the Shliach Tzibor, and ironically, this is the shiur on, well, anyway, I'm not going to spend as much time on this per se, because there's not so much extra to say about it that's not covered by everything else. But anyway, the Chazan says, Elokeinu v'Elokei Avoseinu, right, God of our fathers, Barachenu b'bracha mishuleshet, bless us with the threefold blessing, but Torah ha'ktuva eidei Moshe, that comes from the Torah, written by Moshe Avdecha, your servant. Morami pi Aaron, which is said, uttered by Aaron, or Banav HaKohanim, and his children the Kohanim, Am Kadoshecha, your holy people. Ka'amor, as it is said, Yivarechecha Hashem v'yishmerecha. May God bless, even Tevi on Fiddle on the Roof knows this one. May God bless and protect you. Ya'er Hashem panav elecha v'chuneka. May God shine his face to you and be gracious to you. Yisa Hashem panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. May God turn his face to you and give you peace. I just want to point out one technical thing. If you are the Shliach Tzibor, I think many people say this incorrectly, but it should be Barachenu b'bracha mishuleshet, and then a pause, B'Torah ktuva. It's the threefold blessing, not the blessing repeated 3 times in the Torah, because of course it only appears 1 time in the Torah. Anyway, and so he says the blessing, and everyone says Amen or Kein Yehi Ratzon, and that's Birkat Cohanim without the Kohanim. The Shliach Tzibor replaces them and says the blessing. So let's just look at the context of the Torah. There's 2 places in the Torah where Aaron seems to give Birkat Cohanim. One is in Vayikra, one is in Bamidbar, but only one time has it as a mitzvah. So the Parshat Shmini in Vayikra begins with Moshe assembling, the final day of Moshe assembling the Mishkan, and he's put it up, taken it down every day for 7 days. Now on the 8th day, which is the 1st of Nisan, he puts it up, and he's waiting for something to happen. God said, build this Mishkan, build the tabernacle, but there's nothing happening. So Moshe puts it all up, and nothing happens. So he says, hey, Aaron, sons, elders, let's do some sacrifices. That must be what we need to make the Mishkan work. Also, not only the Kohanim, speak to all the Jewish people. Say, let them do some sacrifices too. Not only burnt sacrifices, sin offerings, but let's do a peace offering as well. Minchaber of Hashem, and a flower offering. Because today it's happening. God's going to show up today in the Mishkan. God's going to be present in the world for the only place and time apart from Mount Sinai. They brought all the sacrifices. They did everything they were supposed to do. Moshe says, this is what we've got to do in order to make the God, the divine presence, appear. And then, I skipped a few verses, but then after that it says, right? So the Shekhinah descends on the Mishkan, and Moshe's relieved that it's worked. Everybody's happy that they've recreated the Sinai experience in the Mishkan. They can take it with them. And Aaron raises his hands to the people, and he blesses them, and he stops doing the sacrifice, or he's finished doing the sacrifices. So the culmination of building the Mishkan and plugging it in and making it work, the culmination of that is Aaron gives a blessing to the Jewish people. Now that's a little bit strange. You might have thought, God's there now. The Shekhinah, the divine presence, the fire, whatever is happening inside. God's right there. What does he need the Kohanim for to give the blessing? Let God give the blessing. But of course, the answer is that the Kohanim aren't ever giving the blessing. It's always God giving the blessing. But God chooses to give the blessing to the Jewish people and to the world through the Kohanim. And so then, that's the wrong verse at the top there. This should be Bamidbar. I don't remember which one. The middle of Parshat Naso. The end of Shishi, end of Parshat Naso. Vaydeber Hashem al Moshe Lemor. So again, there's a different context. It's the same story told at a different time. This is the sacrifices. The Mishkan is working, and then on day one, the tribe of Yehudah brings their tribe sacrifice, and every day for the next 12 days, each of the tribes brings their sacrifice. And after the Torah has listed all the 12 sacrifices of the 12 tribes that inaugurated the Mishkan, the culmination of that is thematically, if not in chronologically, God spoke to Moshe and said, I've messed up the lines anyway. Speak to Aaron and his son, saying, This is how you should bless the Jewish people. Emor lahem, say to them, Yivrechecha Hashem v'yishmerecha, Yireh Hashem panav elecha v'yichuneka, Yisa Hashem panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. For Samuel Shemiel b'nei Israel, place my name, God's name, on the children of Israel, va'ani avarachem, and I, God, will bless them. So this is the clarification of the blessing that Aaron gave spontaneously after the Mishkan came together. God now commands Aaron and his sons to give this blessing, and when they give this blessing, then God will give the blessing. Right. So the Sifra, commenting on that first set of verses, so when he gave this blessing, Aaron and his descendants merited to get the gifts that are given by the people to the Kohanim, and he merited to be the one who raises his hands to give the blessing. For him and for all generations until the end of time, until the resurrection of the dead. Aaron's almost feels like a spontaneous desire to bless the people made him the conduit, him and his children the conduits for divine blessing for all the future history. In the Amidah, Birkat Cohanim happens between the blessing of thanksgiving and the blessing of peace. And it kind of feels like it's just been inserted in there. It doesn't have the form of a regular blessing. We don't say it in Mincha or Marav, only in Shacharit and Musaf and fast days. Okay. But by and large, only Shacharit Musaf. So it just kind of feels a little bit like it's been plugged in out of order, but of course it's exactly supposed to be there. It's exactly the right place for it to be. The Gemara Megillah, Birkat Cohanim Acha. This is the same Gemara that we've been quoting every week, which outlines the order of the Amidah, and clearly Birkat Cohanim is an integral part of the Amidah blessing. So why did the rabbis, the men of the Great Assembly, see fit to put the blessing of the Kohanim after the blessing of Thanksgiving? Tichtiv, because it says, Vaysaron et yadav el ha'am vivarachem, right? The verse we just read, Aaron raised his hands and blessed the people. V'yered me'asot ha'chatat v'a'olah v'ashlamim, and he finished offering the sacrifices. So we began, the Thanksgiving began with Ritzei, finding favor on the sacrifices and the prayers of the Jewish people. Thanksgiving is part of the Thanksgiving is part of the sacrificial rite, and then we go straight on to Birkat Cohanim. Now that's how the Gemara presents it, and that, sure, of course. But I would like to say there's also a reason that it comes before the bracha of peace. Very obvious one, right? The Gemara in Sota says, "My mevarech." What do the Kohanim say when they do the priestly blessing? Which is not what the Shliach Tzibur says, but when the Kohanim give a bracha, what bracha do they make? Amr of Zera, Amr of Chizda, Asher Kedushan B'Kedushato Shel Aharon. One of the very few blessings that's not Asher Kedushano B'Mitzvotav. Right? We're not. God didn't command us with His holiness, but rather Kedushano B'Kedushato Shel Aharon. He commanded us with the holiness of Aharon. Because Aaron was one who seized the moment and gave that blessing. V'tzivanu levarech et amo Yisrael ba'ahava, and God commanded us to bless His people Israel with love. And so the connection between Aaron and the love, right, is why this makes the perfect place connected to peace, as we know from Pirkei Avot. Hillel v'shamai kiblu mihem. Hillel Omer. Hillel says, have a mitalmidav shel Aharon. You should be like the students of Aharon. What are the qualities of Aharon? Ohev shalom, v'rodef shalom, love peace and pursue peace. Ohev et habriot u'mekavan l'Torah, love people and bring them close to Torah. So the blessing of Aharon, which is ahava, which is love, is also the blessing of peace. That the way to make true peace is to, I sound like a hippie from Woodstock, but once you love people, then of course there's peace. When you see the good in people, when you can understand who they are and want to give them a blessing, then of course that leads to peace. And therefore that makes perfect sense in the Amidah that we have Birkat Cohanim right before the blessing of peace. So the Kohanim give the blessing, but of course the Kohanim are not giving the blessing, they're just the conduits for God to give the blessing. And so who's blessing the Kohanim? If the Kohanim are blessing the people, who's blessing the Kohanim? Says the Gemara Chul in Tanya, Kol tivarchu et b'nei Yisrael. Right? The mitzvah is, thus you should bless the children of Israel. Rabbi Yishmael Omer, Rabbi Yishmael, who's going to argue with Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yishmael says, and they're arguing, this is, I should probably give another series of shiurim once on this, but Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva disagree. Yeah, I definitely should. Rabbi Yishmael has this 13 Rabbi Yishmael has this 13 midot, 13 hermeneutical principles, right? 13 13 ways of learning halakha from the text, and Rabbi Akiva has a different set of halachot. There's a different set of tools for learning halakha. And so they're going to argue here on how to interpret this verse. And my brain is now racing about all the things I could say about hermeneutical principles. Anyway, Rabbi Shmuel Omer, Lamadnu bracha leIsrael mipi Kohanim. We've learned from this verse that the Kohanim should bless Israel. The Kohanim atzman lo lamadnu. But we haven't learned that the Kohanim themselves receive a blessing. The end of the verse is, and I, God, will bless them. So you should understand that the Kohanim bless Israel, and God blesses the Kohanim. Rabbi Akiva disagrees. Rabbi Akiva omer lamanu bracha Israel, mipi Kohanim mipi Gvora. Sorry, mipi Kohanim. We've learned that Israel is blessed by the Kohanim. But we haven't learned that they're blessed by God. When the verse is, I will bless them, so that teaches us that the Kohanim give the blessing and God agrees with that blessing. So then, Rabbi Akiva, in other words, according to Rabbi Akiva, the Kohanim give the blessing to the people, and God gives the blessing to people. Rabbi Akiva bracha leKohanim manale. Where does Rabbi Akiva learn that the Kohanim themselves receive a blessing? Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. See, Rabbi Nachman comes along. Rabbi Akiva lives in Israel. 2nd century, Rav Nachman lives in Bavel, a few hundred years later. But he says the Kohanim are blessed from the ultimate source of the blessing, which is Avraham. He says, God says to Avraham, after he says, Lech lecha, go from your land to the land I will show you. He says, those you bless, I will bless, or I'll bless those that bless you, and I'll curse those that curse you. I don't know that translation. But anyway, so the Kohanim here are being Avraham Avinu. They're giving the blessing, and God gives blessings to those who gives blessings. That's the power he gave Avraham. So Birkat Cohanim is not an us and them situation, Kohanim and the people, but rather everybody's getting a blessing, but through the Kohanim, and either, different ways of saying that. So, when we talk about, actually I'm going to go back. I didn't include this source because, as I say, I already had too much to say. But just as a technical halachic point, the Kohanim turn around to face the congregation. So anybody who is on that side of the Kohanim receives the blessing. But not only that, the Gemara in Brachot says also the people who aren't able to come to shul, who are out in the fields, also receive a blessing from the Kohanim when the Kohanim give their bracha, because they're giving a bracha to everybody. The only people who are not included in Birkat Cohanim are people who are in shul and stand on the wrong side of the Kohanim, who stand behind the Kohanim, meaning closer to the ark. They're so busy trying to be closer to God that they miss out on the bracha that the Kohanim turn around and give to the congregation. They separate themselves from the community and they miss out. So as a halachic point, if you are standing in a shul where the Kohanim, where the Duchan is slightly forward and your seat happens to be between them and the ark, you should move so that you're on the other side of the Kohanim, you're between the Kohanim, like on the community side of the Kohanim, not the ark side of the Kohanim, in order to receive the bracha of Birkat Cohanim. But aside from that, doesn't matter if you're behind, I think the Gemara says, an iron curtain, if wherever you are in the vicinity, in the country, in the world, I don't know, the bracha of the Kohanim reaches out to everybody, except those who step out, who exclude themselves. So what does it mean? What kind of Kohen should give Birkat Cohanim? So the Mishnah Megillah says, Hamafta ben Afi, the person who reads the Haftarah. Now that's an honor that you give to somebody you want to honor. So since he has that honor, Hu Poros HaShema, he should also lead the congregation in saying the Shema. He should also be offered to be the Shliach Tzibur, to daven for the lead the prayers, V'hu Nosei Kapav, and he should also do Birkat Cohanim. V'im Haya Katan, but if he's a child under 13, then he can't lead those prayer services, even though he can read the Haftarah. Aviv Rabba Avin Al Yado, then his father or his teacher leads the prayers on his behalf. Katan Koreh B'Torah Mitargem, a child can read from the Torah and can read the translation of the Torah back in those communities or at those times when the Torah was translated into Aramaic after every verse. Avaleno Peres al Shema, he may not lead the congregation in the Shema, Ve'eno Aved Lefnei Teva, he can't be the Shaliach Tzibor, Ve'eno Naseh Kapav, and he may not do Birkat Cohanim. So what do we need for Birkat Cohanim? We need a male Jewish Cohen who is over the age of 13. Now, another disqualification for a Cohen is Cohen sheyesh biyado mumin lo yisad kapav. If a Cohen has deformities on his hands, he should not do Birkat Cohanim. And Rabbi Yehuda Omer af mi shayu yadav tzavot sitim lo yisad kapav. A Cohen whose hands are stained with dye or paint, he should not do Birkat Cohanim. Why not? Because the congregation will look at him and they'll be distracted from concentrating on the prayer, on the blessing, and they'll be distracted by this Cohen who's got funny-looking hands or painted hands or something weird happening with his hands. We see from this that initially the Kohanim would give Birkat Cohanim, the hands were out in the open. We'll see this a few times actually this week and next. But nowadays, I think every community I've been to, the Kohanim cover their hands with a talit so that people won't look at their hands. But originally, the Birkat Cohanim was done with their hands sticking out. Even in the time of the Shulchan Aruch, the Ramah says the Kohanim put a talit over their heads, but their hands should stick out from their talit. And traditionally, it was the people in the congregation who covered their faces with a talit, so they wouldn't look at the Kohanim. We'll talk about that, looking at the Kohanim. But now we often do both, right? We Kohanim cover their hands, and people cover the people in the congregation cover their faces or their heads, or just look away. So now that the Kohanim do cover their hands with the talit, I think the congregation won't be distracted by their hands. So somebody with paint on their hands or with blemishes on their hands also could do Birkat Cohanim. And this is followed up by the Mishnah implies there, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Mishu Yadav Tzavot, if a Kohen has painted hands, he can't do Birkat Cohanim. If everyone's got hands that look like that, then it won't be distracting, and the Kohen can do his Birkat Cohanim. Fine, there's other kinds of blemishes that are going to be distracting if he does Birkat Cohanim. Similarly, if his eyes are always tearing up, that's going to be distracting for the people getting the bracha. Some Rav Huna zavalgan lo yisakapav v'hahu dehav b'shvuta de Rav Huna. There was a person, a Cohen in the community of Rav Huna. His eyes would always run, and he would do Birkat Cohanim. Everybody knew him, everyone was used to him, he was no longer distracting. Someone whose eyes run should not do Birkat Cohanim, but if he's always, everyone knows him, then he may. Someone who's blind in one eye shouldn't do Birkat Cohanim. Again, if his eye looks disfigured or funny, but if everyone knows him and is used to him, they can. And here's an interesting one. Amr of Asi, Haifani or Baishani, a Kohen who comes from Haifa or from Beit Shan, Lo Yisad Kapav, they should not do Birkat Cohanim. Tanya Nami Hachi, there's a braita that supports this. Ein Moridin Lefnei Teva, Lo Anshe Beit Shan v'lo Anshe Beit Haifa. Someone from Beit Shan or Haifa should not lead the prayer, should not be a Shaliach Tzibor. V'lo Anshe Tivonim, also, the people from Tivon shouldn't be. Why not? Because when they speak Hebrew, their accent doesn't distinguish between an aleph and an ayin. They just say them both as silent letters, which I think most Ashkenazi Jews also just say them as silent letters and don't distinguish between the aleph, which is in the front of the mouth, and the ayin, which is said in the back of the throat. And I don't think this is the reason, but it's interesting that in Beit Shan and Tiberia in the north of Israel today, they don't do Birkat Cohanim every day. Anyway, in a time or in a place or a community where people distinguish between Aleph and Ayin, Yemenite communities, many Sephardi communities, then somebody who can't make that distinction should not do Birkat Cohanim, because that will be distracting when they're saying all the wrong words. Amar Rav Yochanan Kol Kohen Sharagat Nefesh Lo Yisa Kapav. Unfortunately, this is a real halachic question nowadays, with the ongoing war. Rabbi Yochanan says any Kohen who has killed somebody can't do Birkat Cohanim. Shenema Yedechem Damim Meleo, because as God said to David HaMelech, or Natan HaNavi, your hands are full of blood, and therefore you can't give a blessing. In terms of halacha, may a Kohen who has served in the army and had been forced to kill terrorists, may he do Birkat Cohanim? The answer is probably yes, but I'm not going into the details. But clearly, Birkat Cohanim is the antithesis of Birkat Cohanim is life-giving, is protection, and it's the antithesis of killing. And here's this is something I've heard from several people, Kohanim who don't want to give Birkat Cohanim. They say, "Who am I to give a bracha?" And why should I put myself up there and say I'm so great to give a bracha to other people, or I don't feel holy enough to give a bracha, or I'm a sinner and I shouldn't give a bracha? The Yerushalmi's got you. Shalot Hamar, a person shouldn't say, Eish Peloni Megalei Arayot v'Shofech Davim v'hu mevarachenu. The congregation shouldn't say, this guy is an adulterer, he's a murderer, he's going to give us a bracha. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God says, Mi mevarachecha. What do you mean? Who's giving you the bracha? Lo ani mevarachecha. It's God who's giving the bracha. Shnei Samud Shemir b'nei Yisrael b'nei Avarachim. The Kohanim are just the intermediary. It's God who gives the blessing. So any Kohen who gets so full of himself and says, I'm not worthy of giving a bracha, misunderstands entirely the point of Birkat Cohanim. That's in fact a sign of pride. The humility would be to say, I'm just doing my job. This is what God wants me to do. And God gives the bracha. And similarly, the community, if they start saying, who is that guy to give a bracha? The answer is that's what God asked them to do, told them to do. Now, you see, the Yerushalmi doesn't have this restriction on somebody who's killed somebody giving Birkat Cohanim. So there's the halach is like the Bavli, but there's clearly room for negotiation in terms of halacha. So just very quickly summarize, already taking too long, but whatever. Rambam Hilchot Tefillah and Birkat Cohanim says there are 6 factors that would prevent a Kohen doing Birkat Cohanim. Right? Shishat Dvarim Mo'ninin Nesiat Kapayim, Halashon, Hamomin, Ha'avera, Hashanim, Hayayin, V'tumat Yadayim. They are somebody who can't speak properly, can't say Aleph and Ayin. Somebody whose hands have a blemish on them, some kind of disfigurement. Avera, someone who's done a specific sin, which would be killing somebody, or things that would disqualify him from being a Kohen. Shanim, someone who's not old enough, not bar mitzvah. Yain, a Kohen who is drunk, may not do Birkat Cohanim. That's the reason that on Simchat Torah, I don't know if it's all shuls, but many shuls on Simchat Torah have a Kiddush club or have a Kiddush in the middle of davening, because the service takes so long, and often people have had a bit of wine, but by the time they get to Musaf, so minhag in many places, the custom is that Kohanim don't do Birkat Cohanim at Musaf on Simchat Torah. In those places where they only do Birkat Cohanim at Musaf on the festivals, sometimes they do it at Shacharit instead. There's no hard and fast rule, but a Kohen who's had a drink of wine may not do Birkat Cohanim even if he's not actually drunk. V'tumat Yadayim, and a Kohen who hasn't washed his hands can't do Birkat Cohanim. So that's why Rambam says it's all about. So this Kohen says, I don't want to give Birkat Cohanim. Why should I do Birkat Cohanim? I don't feel whatever the reason is. That's a bad thing to say. Rabbi Shua ben Levi. Rabbi Shua ben Levi says, "Menayin she'Hakadosh Baruch Hu mitavela Birkat Cohanim." How do we know that God desires Birkat Cohanim? Right? God wants it. He's waiting for it. He's got a desire for it. Shneimah v'samod shemei al bnei Yisrael v'ani avarachem. Right? Place the blessing. Place my name on the children of Israel. Bless them. For Rabbi Shua ben Levi, kol kohen shemevarech mitbarech. Rabbi Shua ben Levi says, every Kohen who gives a blessing is blessed. V'she'einu mevarech ein mitbarech. A Kohen who doesn't give the blessing is not blessed. Shneimah v'avaracha mevarachecha. Going back to that verse from Avram, I'll bless those who bless you. So a Kohen who doesn't want to give Birkat Cohanim should give Birkat Cohanim. V'amar Rabbi Shua ben Levi kol kohen she'eno alei l'duchan, any Kohen who does not go and give Birkat Cohanim, over b'shlosha aseh, even though there's only one verse in the Torah that specifically says the mitzvah Birkat Cohanim, it's as if he transgressed three positive commandments. Because it says, Kol tivarchu, this is how you should bless them. Emor lehem, say to them, v'samut shemi, and they should place my name. He's found three verses. So a Kohen who doesn't do Birkat Cohanim misses out on three positive commandments, or does not fulfill three positive mitzvot. And conversely, one who does. Rav Amar, Rav's got a more pragmatic reason why a Kohen should always do Birkat Cohanim. Chosheshin Shema ben Grusha ben Chalutzahu. If he doesn't do Birkat Cohanim, then everyone's going to think he's not fit to do Birkat Cohanim. He's not qualified as a Kohen, that his mother is a divorcee, or a woman who's done a Chalitza, or a Yevama, or different. Why did they put the English translation? That shouldn't be, Yevama shouldn't be bold there, should it? They copied and pasted from else. Anyway, they'll think he's not fit to be a Kohen if he doesn't do Birkat Cohanim. So there's a pragmatic reason why he should, and Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi gives a religious reason why he should, because that's how he does his mitzvah, and that's how he gets his blessing. And the Shulchan Aruch says this as halacha: Kol Kohen she'en bo achad me'adrim ha'me'akfim. Every Kohen who does not have one of the things that would prevent him from doing Birkat Cohanim, im eno alei duchan, if he doesn't do Birkat Cohanim, afal pi should be tel mitzvah aseh achad, even though technically he's only broken one positive mitzvah. Harei zeh ke'oveh b'shlosha aseh. It's as if he's broken three positive mitzvahs. V'im haya b'beit knesset shekoreh kohanim, or im amru lo lalot, or litol yatav. This applies if he was in the shul when the shliach tzibur said kohanim, or if somebody said go and do Birkat Cohanim, or go wash your hands. But if they never called out Kohanim, then he wasn't asked to do it, then he doesn't violate these positive mitzvot. Kind of sidebar, some people call Birkat Cohanim duchanin, which comes from the Hebrew word duchan, which means the dais, the stage, because the Kohanim stand on the duchan when they do Birkat Cohanim. So in Yiddish, it becomes known as duchanin, and then in English duchaning with a G on the end. And it's referred to as Nasiat Kapayim, raising hands. The Shulchan Aruch talks about the halacha of raising the hands. The Kohanim lift their hands up, or the Gemara refers to it as oleh leduchan, going up to the dais to give the bracha. So Rambam again says, Kohen shelo alohi alo tvar mikol elu dvarim hamonim nesiat kapayim. If a Kohen doesn't have one of the things that would prevent him from doing halachically prevent him from doing Birkat Cohanim, afal pi she'eno chacham ve'eno medakdek mitzvot, even if he's not wise or he's not so careful about the mitzvot, or shua briot mirananim acharav, or people make fun of him, or shlo yam misa'omat no b'tzedek, or is not completely honest in his business dealings, harisin osed kapav, he should do Birkat Cohanim anyway. Ve'ein monin oto lefi shezo mitzvah aseh al kol kohen v'kohen. You don't stop him. You don't stop him. He shouldn't stop doing Birkat Cohanim, because it's a mitzvah on every Kohen to do Birkat Cohanim. V'kohen shirei la nesiat kapayim ve'en omrim la'adam rasha hosef rasha v'amana min mitzvah. If he's a Kohen who could do Birkat Cohanim, even if he's done bad things before, don't say do another bad thing and don't do Birkat Cohanim. The opposite. Do Birkat Cohanim and get an extra mitzvah, or 3 mitzvot for doing Birkat Cohanim. Right. So how do they say Birkat Cohanim? And again, all of this has been, I know it probably feels long from your end. From my end, I feel like I'm cutting out so much stuff. Birkat Cohanim Ketzad, how is Birkat Cohanim performed? B'medina omer ata shalosh brachot. Sorry. Outside of Jerusalem, outside of the temple, they say it is 3 separate brachot. right? Which is how we do it nowadays. And the congregation says Amen after each of the three brachot. Or b'mikdash bracha achat. But in the temple, it was done as one long blessing, and people would only say Amen at the end of the whole thing. And b'mikdash omer Hashem. In the temple, the Kohanim would use God's proper name, which we don't know nowadays, and outside we just say Adonai, which is the name we use instead of God's. So I skipped to the middle. Omer Hashem kech tavo. They would say God's name as it is written. And outside the temple, the Kohanim say God's name as it's referred to colloquially. Outside the temple, Kohanim raise their hands to shoulder height. In the temple, the Kohanim would raise their hands above their heads. Except for the Kohen Gadol, because he was wearing a tzitz, the tiara, on his head, which had God's name on it. And he may not raise his hands higher than God's name, which is on this tiara around his head. Rabbi Yehuda may no, Av Kohen Gadol magbi yadav lemala min hatzitz. Rabbi Yehuda says even the Kohen Gadol does lift his hands above this tiara, because although he's not normally allowed to raise his hands above it, however here, Shnema v'saron et yadav ela am v'varachim. Aaron, who was the Kohen Gadol, raised his hands and blessed the people. So that's the difference between the two things. And also has to be in Hebrew, Elu Nemrim Belashon HaKodesh, Birkat Cohanim. Right, Birkat Cohanim is one of only a handful of prayers or rituals that must be performed in Hebrew and can't be done in any other language. Right, the rest of Tefillah, for example, the Amidah could be said in any language that you understand, but Birkat Cohanim has to be in Hebrew, even if you don't understand Hebrew. So yeah, same, not the same thing, but similar thing. Tanya Idach Kol Tivarchu B'nai Israel. Right, Kol Tivarchu means this is how you should bless them, and that's how we know it has to be in Hebrew. But then the Gemara says B'Shem HaMeforash, you should bless them with the way it's actually written, with God's name as it's written. Atar Me'er B'Shem HaMeforash O'Eino Ela B'Kinui. Does that really mean with God's explicit name, or just with the substitute name? Tamud Lamar Samud Shemi Shemi HaMiuchad Li. So the verse says, put my name, that means God's real name. So in the temple, that they would say God's real name every day when they did Birkat Cohanim. Yacholav B'Kvulin, you might think even outside the temple, the Kohanim would say Birkat Cohanim with God's actual name. Ne'emar kan v'samut shemi, so no, because here it says you should place my name. For Ne'emar lahalan lasumit shemo sham, that he will put his name, God will put his name there. Right, now there, ma lahalan beit bechira, that verse in Devarim, God will put his name there, that refers to the temple. God will rest his presence in Jerusalem. So Avkan beit bechira, so to here, the Kohanim only use God's name, explicit name, in the temple. Tanya Idach Kol Tivarchu, another Brighton Sota. This is how you should bless the people. Panim keneged panim. Right, you bless them face to face. The Kohanim turn around to face the people, because they're giving the blessing to the people. Ata omer panim keneged panim, or eino el panim keneged orev. Should it be face to face, or should it be face to back? Tamad Omar emor lahem ke'adam omer lechavero. So the verses say to them, like a person speaking to another person. There is a custom some people have in the congregation who are not Kohanim to turn around during Birkat Cohanim, so that they don't accidentally look at the Kohanim's hands. That's a mistake, right? It's a mistake because the Kohanim's hands are covered, so there's no need for them to turn away. And it's a mistake because the whole point of Birkat Cohanim is to show this connectedness, this face-to-face, this peace, and to turn around and face the other way is turning your back on the bracha. I remember when I used to go and visit my aunt in Omer, near Beersheva, and I would do Birkat Cohanim in the shul there, and there was always one person who stood at the back to pray, but when it came time for Birkat Cohanim, he'd come right up to the front, stand in front of me, and then turn his back on me. So I was saying Birkat Cohanim looking at his backside, which was both disconcerting and exactly the opposite of what the halacha should be. But he thought he was being very, very religious by both coming to the front to show how religious he was and turning away to show how religious he was. But in fact, as in many cases, too much religiosity is in fact the opposite of what the halacha says. So when Birkat Cohanim happens, yes, there's a custom for people to cover their faces. There's a lovely custom of sons to go into their father's talit during Birkat Cohanim. But you shouldn't turn away from the Kohanim when they're doing Birkat Cohanim. Tanya idach kol tevarchu b'kol ram. The blessing has to be said loudly. You don't have to scream it, but you have to say it in a loud voice. Or maybe you should say it quietly. Talmud lamar emor lahem. The verse says, say to them, Ka'adam shomer lechaver. You should be saying it in a way that you would speak to another person. So when you're standing in front of giving a public lecture from the front of the hall, you would say it in a loud voice. So to Birkat Cohanim, you should say it in a loud voice, but not in a screaming voice, because that would not be how you would speak to another person. So here's kind of a weird thing, and it's kind of because of my friend Penny. No, Lippy. Sorry, Lippy. How do we know that a Kohen who's gone up to do Birkat Cohanim, that he shouldn't say to himself, since the Torah has given me permission to bless the Jewish people, I'll give some extra brachas. I'm good with brachas. Right? Maybe I'll say Hashem Elokei Avotechem Yosef Aleichem. Right? God should add to you. Talmud Lomar Lo Tosif Al Davar. First and Torah says, don't add to the any of the mitzvot. So the Torah says these are the brachot to say. You may not add any extra brachot. Right? It's kind of a Kohen who would add extra brachot is obviously undermining the whole point of Birkat Cohanim, because they think they're the ones giving the bracha. And do you have extra because I'm the bracha guy? Right? The opposite. The Kohanim are not giving the bracha. The Kohanim are just the conduits for the bracha. There is a halachic question. There's a custom which actually is really a semi-mitzvah. When the Kohanim finish saying Birkat Cohanim, they come back to join everybody else. So people say Shkoyach or Yeshakochacha, right? Well done, whatever you say. And then the Kohanim, the response normally to Yeshakoyach is Baruch Tiyeh, may you be blessed. So two things. One is that the Kohanim, if it's a time when you can't speak, let's say after the Amidah, when there's on Shabbat Shacharit, after the Birkat Cohanim, and after Sim Shalom, then there's a Kaddish. Sheikh Tzibor is saying Kaddish, Tidkabel. So you're not allowed to speak. You're never allowed to speak, but you're not allowed to speak, particularly during Kaddish. So the Kohanim should remain standing where they are and not come back to sit down during Kaddish, because otherwise people will start saying Shkoyach and talking during Kaddish. But the other thing that's relevant to this halacha is there's again halachic discussion. If someone says to the Kohen Shkoyach and the Kohen says back Baruch Tiyeh, are they adding an extra bracha that wasn't commanded from them? Are they in violation of this principle in the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah? And there are some Kohanim who make a point of not saying Baruch Tiyeh, but also clearly that's not part of the same bracha that they said on the Duchan. They're now coming back home. They're not adding to the traditional bracha. They're just responding appropriately to someone saying thank you, say you're welcome. And the word says Baruch Tiyeh. So it's not a problem, but it's the kind of thing that people think could be a problem. And we began by talking about the connection that this bracha fits in immediately following the blessing of Thanksgiving. Rather that it's connected to the sacrificial part of Thanksgiving. So, Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Kol Kohen she'eno oleh ba'avodah, shuv eno oleh. If the Kohen hasn't at least started going up to Birkat Cohanim by the time the Shliach Tzibur says Ritzei, he begins the sacrificial part of the Amidah, then he may know he's missed his chance. He has to step outside. He can't do. If you're saying the Amidah very slowly and the Shliach Tzibur is going quickly, and he's already started Ritzei before you finish your Amidah, then it's too late to go and do Birkat Cohanim, because Birkat Cohanim is the culmination of the sacrificial part, because it says Shneimah Vaysaron et yadav elam vivarachem ve'er me'asod hachatat va'olav va'ashlamim Right? Aaron went and gave the blessing when he'd finished doing the sacrifices. So Ma'alan ba'avodah, Kam ba'avodah, just as there Aaron's bracha followed the sacrifice, was connected to the sacrifices, so too in Birkat Cohanim, it has to be connected to the sacrifices. So if you're standing at the back of the shul and you've got a long way to go, or you've taken a step in the right direction, but you don't quite get there in time, that's fine. But you have to be heading towards the duchan as soon as the shliach tzibor says ritzei, and not just when he says kohanim. And now one of the reasons that's difficult, or two of the reasons that's difficult, is because Kohen has to take off his shoes and he's got to wash his hands. So he's got to go the opposite direction often, or outside of shul, to wash his hands and still get back in time to be there in time. So why did the Kohen take off their shoes? Right, the halacha is lo yalo b'akonim educham b'min alim aval batei shokayim shari. Kohanim may not do Birkat Cohanim with their shoes on, but they may with their socks. In the temple, the Kohanim did not wear shoes or socks. They had to do the sacrifices barefoot. They'd be walking around up to their knees in blood. Before they started the working every day in the temple, they'd wash both their hands and feet, and they'd wash them themselves. Next week, we'll talk about why the Leviim have a custom to wash the hands of the Kohanim. But in the temple, the Kohanim would wash their own hands. That's not what's happening here. The Kohanim are not taking their shoes off because they're replicating the service of the Kohanim in the temple. And that's why they're allowed to wear socks, which would not have been permitted in the temple. Mishnah Berurah gives the reason, and it's very, again, pragmatic reason. B'minalim shema yefsak lo ritzua v'ganayhu lo u'mitlatzim alav kshesan lo muteret. So maybe the shoe strap holding his shoe on will snap, and then he'll be embarrassed. People will laugh at him for having his shoes undone. Right, his shoelace will be untied if he does, and so you don't want to have him embarrassed by that when he's doing Birkat Cohanim. Or alternatively, maybe he'll stop to retie his shoelace while everyone else is doing Birkat Cohanim, because he doesn't want to do Birkat Cohanim with the shoes untied. And then v'yamru ben grusha or ben chalutza, people will say he's not fit to be a Kohen because he didn't go up and do Birkat Cohanim. And that's the reason people say that's why he went and sat down. They won't see his tying the shoe, they'll say he gave up because he's not a real Kohen. Even shoes that don't have, slip-on shoes that don't have shoelaces or straps, Asura, it's still forbidden to do Birkat Cohanim Jalal Plug Rabbanim, because the rabbi said we don't distinguish, right? The rule is the rule. So that's why Kohanim take their shoes off. It's a little bit strange because sometimes the socks are more embarrassing than the shoes would be. Although my father-in-law, who's also Kohen, and my son and I coordinate our socks, usually on Shabbat, so we all have the same socks, and that's called thinking on your feet. Anyway, Kohanim should put their shoes in a place to the side, not leave them sitting out in the middle of the shul, because that would not be respectful for the shul or for the community. You take them off before you wash your hands, because one of the reasons, if you touch your shoes, you have to wash your hands again. If you have slip-on shoes that you can take off without touching them, then you can take them off after you've washed your hands. I realize there's a lot of this is just specifically for Kohanim, but I thought it might be interesting anyway for other people. Just very quickly, 2 slides on how to do Birkat Kohanim, how the Kohanim are supposed to hold their hands when they do Birkat Kohanim. This is something that they don't really teach you in Kohen school. And you're just expected to know. And there's lots of pictures like this one over here, or pictures on gravestones, or pictures in books, all sorts of shapes and ways the Kohanim have. Everyone knows, right, Mr. Spock, and there's Vulcan, there has the 2 fingers. Fingers are divided into 2 and 2, and the thumb sticking out to the side, like in this picture here, for example. The reason for doing this division of the fingers is not anything mystical or Kabbalistic, but it's based on a verse in Shiur Shirim. Shiur Shirim is talking about the divine presence. Shiur Shirim is a love song between the Jewish people and the divine presence, and the beloved is looking for the lover, and she's gazing out through the trellis, right? It says, Right? He's standing just behind the wall. So Ahakot Leina means Bate Kinesiota Bate Mitra Shot, right? God's just on the other side of the wall of the shul. Mashgiach Bein Achalonot, he's looking through the window. Mibenk Tifehem Shel Kohanim, he's looking through the shoulder, between the shoulders of the Kohanim. Metzitz Min Acharakim, he's peering through the lattice, through the trellis work. Mibein Etzbatem Shel Kohanim, between the fingers of the Kohanim. So then the beloved answers, what does it say? Yivarechecha Hashem v'yishmerecha. He says Birkat Cohanim. So the reason the Kohanim make these gaps in their hands is so that it's as if God is peering through the lattice work at the Jewish people. And so, just practically speaking, if you're a Kohen, there should be 5 gaps between your fingers, which would be between the second and third finger, between the first finger and thumb, and then there should be a gap. Bend your thumb so that there's a gap between the knuckles of the 2 thumbs. Your thumb should be very close but not touching, and then the same on the other hand. That makes 5 gaps. So this guy here in this picture, he's got gaps between his fingers, and I guess his gap is between the outside of his 2 thumbs, which is one way that's done, but the more correct way, I think, or a different way of doing it, is to bend the thumb at the knuckle to make a gap there as well. I think last week, this may be the first time for many, many, many years, someone shared on Facebook a video of Kohanim doing Birkat Cohanim on Har HaBayit, on the Temple Mount. For many years, prayer was forbidden on the Temple Mount, and that rule was strictly enforced. More recently, it's still forbidden, but they don't enforce it so strictly. And last week, 2 Kohanim, or at least there was a video of 2 Kohanim who got up and did Birkat Cohanim. Because they're not allowed to pray there, they didn't have a talit or tefillin with them, so they did it without any talit, so you can see what their hands look like when they do Birkat Cohanim. And I would like to suggest that the guy on the right is doing it more correctly, and the guy on the left is doing it incorrectly, having his hands so far apart. So the Shulchan Aruch says, the Kohanim raise their hands to shoulder height. The right hand should be slightly higher than the left hand. They spread out their hands and separate their fingers. And they make 5 gaps in their fingers. Between the 2 fingers and the other 2 fingers. That's 1 gap. Between the first index finger and the thumb is another gap. Between the 2 thumbs is another gap. And then the same on the side. And the hands should be face down. Often people pray with their hands up, invoking heaven. Here the Kohanim have their hands down, palms down towards the ground, and the back of their hands upwards. So that's a picture of 2 Kohanim doing Birkat Cohanim on the Temple Mount. If you didn't know there were so many trees on the Temple Mount, then now you do. And that's it. Thank you very much. I've got a lot more to talk about next week. I hope this wasn't too detailed for non-Kohanim. But anyway, I'm sorry. It just gave me a chance to say all the things I've been thinking about for many, many years. And just trust me that I left out a lot of what I did want to say as well. Thank you very much. See you all next week. Same time, same channel.
It was fascinating.